Hi, I'm Andrew Work for NexChange. I'm down at the Emtech event in Hong Kong. And if you want to know what the Emtech event is all about, in one word, geniuses. We're hearing about some amazing things today, including a big session on artificial intelligence. I am sitting here with Philip Chen. He is the executive chairman of Soul Machines. Horizon Ventures has invested into this New Zealand company, and he gave a great talk today about what this company is doing and a totally different way about thinking about artificial intelligence and how it can be built. And Philip, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
You kicked off today talking about, you took it in a very philosophical bend and talking about a philosophical divide that maybe people weren't conscious of, maybe until, for some of us, until you brought it to stage today. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I was referring to a recent David Brooks talk. David Brooks is a New York Times columnist, and he was speaking of a formulation that or a philosophical mistake that we're making as a culture. And to me, it was the same, I think, philosophical mistake in AI that we've been making. And so what he said was, as a culture, we've chosen René Descartes over Augustine.
Okay, and for people that don't know Descartes and Augustine, what does that mean?
So René Descartes, he's usually thought of as sort of the father of the Enlightenment, right? He is the one that he says, "I think, therefore I am," and he sort of launched a whole trajectory of thought, that people call Cartesian, which is to say that you think of human beings as primarily cognitive creatures,
Yeah.
right? And on the flip side, you have somebody like Augustine. He was a theologian, he was a philosopher as well, but he was seen as, a Christian philosopher and theologian. And he would wax a lot about, things like worship and things like emotional longing. And there's a whole tradition of thought, even that that followed Cartesian thought in the Romantic period, where that was revived, where there needed to be more emotion, there needed to be more longing, it needed to be more human, rather than seeing people as being reduced to just cognitive machines.
Yeah, and when it comes to AI, how is that reflected in the split in thinking that you see in AI and the new direction that Soul Machines is taking?
So what we see in AI in my talk, I say most all of the investments, most all of the media coverage has been in the cognitive side, AI. Anywhere from reasoning to perception to natural language processing to planning, all of these are very cognitive, and I use the phrase AI state of mind purposefully.
Yeah.
But what hasn't been done in AI a lot is, a lot of study in emotional feedback and emotional intelligence, face-to-face conversations. How do you relate to machines in an emotional way? How does machines read your intention just through your facial feedback, just through your tone of voice, just the way you breathe, the way you look at me, the way you nod? All of these tell you something about the person's emotional state of mind that largely is ignored in a lot of AI design, because in most of the devices that we interact with machines right now, it's often disembodied, it's not transparent. Even the voice controls that we're using right now, the cameras that we use, we don't need that type, or we have to train ourselves to learn how to use these machines.
Sure.
But the face has been, the most natural interface for us. We've evolved into, learning how to interpret and read faces.
So Soul Machines is developing these face, kind of emotional avatars that use the face as a model of communication. How is the computing different when you talk about this philosophical split? How is Soul Machines doing the computing differently to develop this new way of thinking about AI, this new way of taking action with AI?
Well, I would say that it takes a more holistic approach. It's not a reductionistic approach.
Right.
And so it takes models of, face-to-face interaction. It takes models of developmental psychology. But Soul Machines has really built what we call the nervous system. So in our presentation, you can see you can connect a Siri, which is right now the speech process. You can connect, a different brain into this nervous system. You can connect different sensors. Of course, you can connect cameras, biometric data that feeds into the system. But our system is focused on interpreting that data, and we've built, all the from biological systems, and so I give the example of breathing, right? We simulate breathing because the way you breathe tells you about your emotional state, and every human being that speaks is dependent on the way they breathe, and so to simulate a very realistic text-to-speech algorithm, for example, we need to simulate breathing first. And so that's a biological model that we build first before we lay on top the natural language text-to-speech algorithms.
Yeah, that brings us to another old divide. The metaphysites and the duophysites. Are the mind and body separate? You're trying to build an artificial body to go with your artificial mind, recognizing the two influence each other.
Yes, so in that sense, we're very much, again, very holistic. We do believe that, you can think with your hands, you think on your feet differently from sitting down. I think we take that all into account when we're building this autonomous character, this autonomous avatar.
Okay. I've seen some of the work you're doing and the avatars on screen, and it's exciting. It's pretty amazing. It's a little eerie. It's a little too real.
Yes.
If you like. I'm going to change gears a little bit and ask you. You came to Soul Machines as their executive chairman from Horizon Ventures. This is an investment. What was it about this that attracted Horizon Ventures as an investment? And where do you think there's going to be a payoff for this? I know that sometimes Horizon Ventures makes long-term bets. They'll put money into something that, like when they got into Facebook in very early days when nobody knew what it was going to be, or companies like Waze. Is this a long-term play where you don't really know where it's going to go, or do you have a clear horizon for why you made this investment?
Well, I think, at least my view in AI, if you look at all the big investments from speech recognition, image recognition to planning, navigation, a lot of it is not because we are smarter. It wasn't better algorithms. Because if you look at all those breakthroughs, those algorithms with those breakthroughs, on average, has been invented 18 years ago. But the data that has been made available has only been 3 years ago.
Right.
And that tells me that we haven't really gotten smarter. We've gotten bigger, cheaper, and faster. But with Soul Machines, we're trying to get smarter on the emotional computation side. And it's also gathering a completely different class of data that nobody's gathering right now, right? Whether it was Facebook, they get your social graph, that's the type of data. Of course, advertisers are interested in very different data, psychographics data. But this emotional data it's been a void there, right? And because of that, we see an opportunity of this EQ data being a huge part of and potential for growth.
Okay, so where in the old days, people were saying more of the old data, you're looking at a whole new set of data and analyzing it in a different way. All right. Well, Phil, that's great. This is really exciting stuff you're doing. I know people are going to keep a close eye on Soul Machines. I know as the executive chairman, you're going to keep a close eye on them and be interested to see where you go with that. I'm Andrew Work for NexChange. This is Phil Chen from the executive chairman of Soul Machines, also with Horizon Ventures. Phil, thanks a lot for talking to us today. Cheers. All right.